Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to go. Um, I'd like to welcome everyone, members, officers, and members of the public to this meeting of the Planning Control Committee, particularly those members of the public who are coming back for a second go at this one. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee clerk to explain how proceedings will work. Luke.
Thank you, Chair. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When the public participants are invited to speak, their microphones will be made live by the committee officer. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room, and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? No? Back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Luca. One, apologies for absence. I've received apologies for absence from councillors Claire Winchester and Ruth Brown. No further apologies. I would point out that normally they would have supplied substitutes, but because of we deferred an application we're hearing again, that's not appropriate. So there's just the 10 of us. Item 2, minutes of the meeting. I would like to propose we take as read and approve as a true record the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June 2026. May I have a seconder? Oh. I think Councillor Billing got there, just beat you to it. Any comments on the minutes? Okay, if we could vote on approving the minutes.
Chair, that motion's carried.
Thank you. Item 3 is notification of other business. There is none. Item 4, Chair's announcements. 1, recording. In accordance with the Council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available both on the Council's YouTube channel as well as on the Council's ModGov site alongside the documents from this meeting. 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under the Chair's announcement on the agenda. 3, to clarify matters for the registered speakers. Members of the public in groups of supporters or objectors have up to 3 minutes per person. Where there is only one public supporter or objector, then that member of the public will have up to 5 minutes. There are separate groups for people registered as member advocate objectors, member advocate supporters, and for their applicant, their agent or representative. This is up to 5 minutes per group. All speakers will receive a warning when you have 1 minute remaining. Following the conclusion of your time, members will be invited to ask points of clarification. At the end of your allotted time, you'll be advised that the time allowed has ended and that you must cease. And I will give a warning when there's 1 minute left of your time. 4, debate procedure. In order to move to a debate on an item, we will require a proposer and a seconder for a motion at the appropriate time in the meeting. This should take into account the information in the officer's report and will follow the officer presentation and any public presentations, including member advocates, as well as any questions of the officer and points of clarification to the public presenters. As a reminder for members, should you wish to propose a motion contrary to the recommendations included in the officer's report, you will be required to provide clear and evidence reasons for this proposal. 5, section 4.8.23a. For the purposes of clarification, in order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and consideration for that item. If a member leaves the room at any point, they will not be able to vote. I will take a comfort break at a suitable point in the meeting should proceedings go on at length. 6, meeting cut-off. As you're all aware, there's a significant amount of business on the agenda, as outlined under 4.8.24g of the Council's Constitution. If the meeting proceeds to 10:30 p.m, the item being considered at that time will then be the final item considered at tonight's meeting. The remaining business will be deferred to the next meeting on Thursday, the 23rd of July. Item 5, public participation. I'll just go through the speakers I have registered. I have Ian Wright for item 6. White, sorry. Nick Black for item 6 as well. Welcome. Martin Newman, item 6. Councillor Rolf Munzer, item 6. Rebecca Rose for item 6. And Catherine Bentham for welcome, Catherine. So we'll go on to item 6, application 25017666, OP, land on the south side of Cowards Lane, Codicot, Hertfordshire. Sean Greaves to present. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members and members of the public. There's one update, and this relates to a recent further letter of objection from a resident of the Riddy. And this is on the council's website as a public comment. The objector, it's a further objection from the local resident referring to the foul water system and questioning the capacity of the foul water system to deal with surcharge during times of flooding. And the objector wishes to know where the assessment is, demonstrating that existing foul sewer has sufficient hydraulic capacity to receive pumped foul flows from the 30 new dwellings when there is already a history of surcharges resulting sewage escaping into the Riddy and neighbouring bungalows. The objector points out that there's no surface water drains in the locality, so heavy rain causes the sewer to surcharge, and points out and says that there's been several incidents, the last one, the worst being in September 2024, when the gardens were flooded, and there was water ingress into buildings was narrowly avoided. And reference is made to climate change and the potential to exacerbate that problem further. The applicant's agent has responded to the objection on behalf of Horwich Strategic Land. And firstly, they point out that there's photos actually submitted, which are also on the website. And the photos submitted show the Riddy, which does not form part of the development and is a private, unadopted road, which has no gullies or drainage, as is evident from images that were submitted. Therefore, water has nowhere to go due to the absence of that drainage. Secondly, reference is made to a lack of response from Thames Water to the current application in relation to the capacity of the foul water system. But they highlight that Thames Water did respond to consultation on the 23rd July, and they advised that with regard to wastewater network and sewage treatment works, infrastructure capacity, they have no objection. They do recommend an informative, and that informative is actually on the report at Appendix A, which basically says that a groundwater risk management permit from Thames Water would be required if discharging groundwater into the public sewer. Any discharge made without such a permit would be deemed illegal and result in prosecution under the Water Industry Act. The applicant is not indicating any proposal to discharge surface water into the sewage system, and indeed there's a sustainable urban drainage system proposed to deal with surface water on the application site. So this matter is addressed in the submitted flood risk assessment at paragraphs 4.37 to 4.44. And as I said earlier, Thames Water have been consulted and they raise no objections subject to an informative. And that's the end of the update. Thank you. So if we could go on to the slides. They are the same as last time, so I probably won't dwell too long on them because members have seen them before, and many of you, if not all of you, have also been to the site, so you'll be familiar from actually I've been visited the site. So first slide, please. So this is the red line showing the extent of the application site, which we saw before, and going down from Cowards Lane to the south of the site is a public footpath that runs through the middle. Next slide, please. That dotted line shows the public footpath. The beige area would be the extent of the built-up area. This is the parameter plan, and the green area would be areas which would not be developed and would accommodate open space landscaping, and the SUDS area, as well as a locally equipped area for play at the bottom corner. Next slide, please. And this is illustrative layout showing how it envisages that the site would be developed. This, as I said earlier, it's illustrative only because this application is outlined with all matters except access reserved for later approval. Next slide, please. And this is a drawing of the access. This drawing shows in pink the extent of adopted highway, which includes the verges to the side of the carriageway. This slide shows visibility displays in blue at the entrance to the site. The footpath, the roadside pavement is proposed on the left-hand side to the access road and would extend up Cowards Lane to the junction with St Albans Road, as discussed before. Next slide, please. This is a photograph off on St Albans Road, looking at the junction with Cowards Lane, looking east. Next slide, please. And this is a view looking down Cowards Lane towards the access to the site. Next slide. And this is looking back up towards the junction with St Albans Road along Cowards Lane. Next slide. And this is looking further up Cowards Lane towards St Albans Road, closer to the entrance to the site. Next slide, please. And this is looking down Cowards Lane to the east, and the entrance to the site, which is on the right. Next slide, please. And this is the entrance to the site at the junction with Cowards Lane. You can see Field House on the left. Next slide. And that's Marlin, which is to the right as you are entering the site, as members will have noticed on the site visit. Next slide, please. That's a photograph of the front elevation of Field House. Next slide, please. And that's a view looking towards the access gate to the field. And you can see the pedestrian gate on the right that allows access to the public right-of-way that crosses the site. Next slide, please. And that's looking back to the field gate. And you can see Marlin on the left and Field House on the right. Next slide. And that's looking further back within the site towards those two dwellings. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the horses having a meet in the middle of the site. And behind them in the distance is the stables. The houses to the right are houses that front St Albans Road. Next slide, please. And once again, this is looking at houses that back onto the site that front onto St Albans Road. Next slide. And that's looking back again towards Marlin and Field House. Next slide. And that's the public footpath as it leaves the site in that southern corner of the site. Next slide. And that's a view looking towards from within the site on the public footpath towards the Riddy. And that's the end of these slides. Thank you. The application, as you members are aware, was deferred from meeting on the 4th of June. It was deferred for members to undertake a site visit and for further consideration to be given to the tilted balance. The report that was written for you tonight simply addresses the tilted balance, and hopefully members have found that useful. And Appendix A to the report is the original report that recommended that planning permission be granted, and that recommendation remains the same. Thank you very much. Chair.
Thanks very much, Sean. Do members of the committee have any questions for the planning officer? Councillor Louise Pearce, please.
Thank you. So with respect to the tilted balance, and I've read the report, when this application was first scheduled to come to committee, the recommendation was to refuse. Has there been any change in planning law regarding tilted balance since that recommendation was made originally?
No, there has not. The change in recommendation was a result of receiving legal advice and a full review of the application in the light of that legal advice.
Okay.
Councillor Tyson, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I just had a question about the golden rules, which seem to be a linchpin of the recommendation as they carry significant weight. And specifically, this one's about the green spaces, the addition or improvement to green spaces accessible to the public. From my view of the documents, and also you had a slide with the layout, so the amount of green space that's accessible to the public on the site appears to be quite small. I just wondered whether there was a standard of how much green space should be provided and how as an accessible area for the public, and what the actual standards are on that as a proportion of the site overall. And then also about the point, I'm looking at paragraph 159 in the NPPF about the potential for habitat creation and how the proposal contributes towards that.
Thank you. Yes, there's no, well, we do have standards for larger developments when you come to sports pitch provision, etc. In this instance, we saw on the parameter plan, there would be an extent of open space, which would include a local equipped area for play and a SUDS area and a landscaping area. And so assessing that, open space and landscape provision, it was considered that the application met that particular element of the golden rules. There's no minimum standard in terms of those factors. When it comes to larger housing developments, you may well be required, for example, to provide a sports pitch on the site, but those are quite large developments that require that level of standard. And obviously there's minimum sizes for sports pitches of different types. But the answer to the question is no, there's no minimum standard. It's a matter of judgment based upon the site, its location, and the proposed housing scheme.
Does that answer your question, Tom? Questions?
Yeah, partially. The other, what in my mind, I was kind of disregarding the SUDS area as an accessible area for the public, because I don't know whether that's what it would be in reality. And then the follow-up question was also about this potential for habitat creation or nature recovery if it's land that's been identified as having has it been identified as having a particular potential for that, or is it just basically losing its potential for that?
Yes, that matter is dealt with in terms of compensation for the loss of the wildlife site, and obviously there's a BNG condition in that regard, and the applicants have proposed 15% net gain rather than the required statutory required 10% net gain. So it was felt that the scheme met that particular provision of the golden rules as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Winstanley, Dave.
Thanks, Chair. My question relates to the loss of the local wildlife site. So when that was designated as a local wildlife site, does that designation endure regardless of how the site is managed or not managed? Because as we can see from the photos, it is heavily grazed. If it doesn't endure, are they reviewed or?
The best person to answer that question is probably our ecologist, Liz Anderson. My understanding is that in this instance there has been degradation of the local wildlife site, but it remains a local wildlife site. Liz, are you able to assist any further?
I am. Yes, I hope so. So the site was originally designated in 1997. and it's normal for wildlife sites to sort of be regularly reviewed. I'm not sure when this was last reviewed, but I know when we did the site visit that this particular, the northern part of the site, because it's half of the wildlife site, the northern part picked up, recognised meadow buttercup and common knapweed. And when we did the site visit a couple of weeks ago, they were still present, albeit in smaller numbers, I'm sure, but they are still there. Does that help?
Okay, Councillor Peace, Louise.
Thank you. Could I ask Liz a question as well? Something that came up on the site visit. I wondered if you could just explain the difference between compensation and mitigation.
Yeah, I hope so. So we have the mitigation hierarchy, where the first point is to avoid. So you would, if you've got any development, you would, if you have an impact recognised, you would try to avoid that. If you can't avoid it, you will then move to mitigation, which will look to minimise impacts. And yeah, so in the I was going to give an example, but yeah, actually, if you'll indulge me, I will give you an example. So if you had a school playing field where the children were, and that playing field was built on, to mitigate that impact, you might actually provide alternative play space or enhance the play space in a smaller area. Perhaps you might put a 3G pitch in or something. But if you can't do that, you would then move to compensation, which would mean you'd have to do something elsewhere. But the key point with the compensation is that it should be in the proximity to as close as possible to where that impact is. So if you had the playing field and you compensated for that away from where the children were, it doesn't really hit compensation. So it's avoid, mitigate, compensate.
Councillor Tyson.
Yeah, sorry, just to return to the golden rules. I had another question actually on the contribution to the local or national infrastructure. Could you just briefly outline how that condition is fulfilled?
Yes, as you probably see from the table that sets out the Section 106 obligations, there are contributions towards local infrastructure in that, in terms of, for example, highway contributions and contributions to education, etc. So the planning obligations set out at Table 1 of the report Appendix A set out various contributions towards secondary education, childcare contribution with regards to younger children, children between 5 and 11, special educational needs contribution, library service contribution, youth service contribution, recycling centre contribution, a transfer station contribution, fire and rescue service contribution, and then there's strand 2 contributions towards the highway authority, which is for active travel, to encourage active travel and mitigate the pressures of the development upon that. And also there is the public footpath proposed, which would be dealt with under the Section 278 agreement on the Highways Act. So those are the matters that address, in our view, address that particular provision of the Golden Rules.
Okay, Tom. Yeah,
That's
okay.
fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Councillor Prescott Martin.
Thank you. Can I come back onto the mitigation versus compensation question? And I'm casting my memory back to the previous meeting when we discussed this originally. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that mitigation on site was almost impossible, and that therefore there would be compensation off site. Is that correct?
Maybe you should start.
Sean, do you want to go first, and then yeah.
Yes, basically the applicant has indicated that it's not been possible to provide mitigation. The applicant indicated that they approached neighbouring landowners who own land within the remainder of the local wildlife site, and they were willing to engage in that process. And therefore, you looked at the next stage of compensation.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So we can't do anything on site. So we're looking at something off site. At what point? And I have some concerns about wildlife in different areas, not necessarily for the wildlife, but for the well-being of the people who actually live there, because they're going to lose the benefit of having wildlife in their immediate vicinity. But my question is, at what point does compensation become irrelevant because the proximity is just simply too far away? Whereupon the developer's suggestion or offer to provide 15% rather than the required 10% is, and please pardon the pun, it becomes a bit of a red herring because it's irrelevant. There's of no benefit to the people who live in the area.
That matter is not part. That isn't part of the compensation proposed. The BNG net gain is the standard condition. That's separate from and an additional to the compensation provisions that would be required for the loss of the local wildlife site. The net gain, biodiversity net gain of 15% would be achieved through a standard condition, and it's envisaged that biodiversity net gain would be achieved. The applicants indicated that they've approached the owner of the Habitat Bank at Western Hills near Baldock to deliver that BNG net gain. With regards to compensation for the loss of a local wildlife site, that's a matter that's dealt with by the recommendation that the applicant enter into a legal agreement, a planning obligation, and that's a separate matter. And we would require a scheme to show where the compensation would take place, and obviously our aim would be that compensation be as close to the application site as possible, and that's part of that negotiation and will be part of any consideration of that scheme. And if it's felt that that scheme did not adequately compensate for the loss of the local wildlife site, then we wouldn't approve that scheme.
Sorry, do you want to come first, Liz?
All I was going to say was, in terms of proximity with compensation, you want to look at the impact, not just to the habitat that's there, but actually the species that are using the habitat. So you might have bats using the hedgerows or different insects. So you want to maintain that connectivity, the functional connectivity, so that species can still do their thing.
Thanks, Liz. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I don't really want to labour this point, but I do go back to proximity, because when we're being told that the developer is offering some alternative wildlife space many miles away, you have to question the value to the local residents. And at what point do we, as the planning authority, say that's just not going to be suitable?
I think we need to listen to this bit, because I think, in fairness, Martin, I made the same mistake before the site visit. I think we are in danger of confusing the biodiversity net gain offset, which is what we're talking about in the Western Hills and whatever, and trying to find some mitigation stroke compensation on the local wildlife site. As I understand it, this is two separate things. And I'm only saying because I misunderstood that as well. So it's not.
But we've already been told just a couple of minutes ago that the developer's not been able to secure alternative local mitigation.
Yes, and that's something I intend to come back to shortly.
Okay, thank you.
The advice from our barrister was that the compensation would, in her view, be acceptable if it was within the local native recovery strategy area. that's identified in the local nature recovery strategy, which could be further afield from a policy viewpoint. But from an ecological viewpoint, it is clear that the closer to the site, the better in terms of connectivity, and obviously that's the view that's been taken by Liz Anderson. So it will be a matter for the applicant to put forward a case with regards to the compensation and the strategy or the scheme that they will put forward in order to compensate, to ascertain whether that is acceptable or not, from a planning viewpoint, planning policy viewpoint, and also from an ecological viewpoint as well, because the two aren't necessarily quite mixing well together.
Okay, Liz. No. Okay, sorry, Claire, I'm just going to jump in front of you because I just wanted to make a point on this thing, because I similar thought process to you, Martin. I think when we did the site visit, one of the discussions that we had was around mitigation as opposed to compensation, and I think there was a view that mitigation would be better in terms of the local wildlife site, and I think the view was expressed quite forcefully by people in the previous meeting about that having to be local. Been trying to grapple with how as a planning committee we could sort of write that in, and whether we can do it as a condition or whether it would be part of section 106, and whether we were able to resolve to grant the application subject to the section 106 achieved mitigation for the loss of the local wildlife site, or whether that would have to be, and I'm looking at Sean for obviously watertight, whether we could be that blunt, or whether it would have to be mitigation or compensation. But is there a way as a committee that we can seek to achieve some mitigation for the loss of the local wildlife site?
The recommendation could follow the policy, which basically sets out a clear preference for mitigation. And the recommendation could set out that in the first instance, attempts should be made to the scheme should identify means of seeking to mitigate the impact, and as a last resort, compensate. But I think the recommendation should also include compensate, because the policies, national and local, allow for compensation in the absence of an ability to mitigate. So the recommendation in my recommendation to you is that if you were to go down that line, you should basically refer to mitigate, or as a last resort, compensate, as in line with policy.
Okay, and I will call in the other two people shortly. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I'm conscious people are in the room. If we were to go down that line of seeking mitigation, but with the option of compensation, how much weight will the first bit have?
That would be your recommendation. That would be in the recommendation. It would be officers to seek to achieve that aim. If at the end of the day officers fail to achieve that aim, then the application could, under those circumstances, be referred back to Planning Control Committee to take a final view on the matter. If they felt that the scheme was inadequately addressed what the resolution of committee was. So under those circumstances, I'd report the matter back to committee for final decision.
Okay, I will reflect on that, as will the rest of the committee. Claire, I'm sorry, I jumped in front of you. Claire Billing.
Yeah, I just wanted to get some more confirmation about the compensation. So it's down to the developer to come up with a scheme that the compensation can be paid to. The 15% can be paid to improve. It's 15 for the compensation as well, though, isn't it? Oh, okay. Right.
No, so it's the 15% was what was being offered in biodiversity net gain, which would be offset potentially at Bulldog.
Yeah.
And then it's the compensation or the mitigation, as has been since been discussed, will be for the impact to the local wildlife site, and that would need a strategy. So there's
So
no,
it's a scheme, it's not an
it's a
amount.
scheme. Yeah, there's no biodiversity net gain has a proxy for value. So you have units for each habitat, sort of has a unit value, and that's how you can get your 15% because you have a baseline. But the local wildlife site doesn't have a value attributed to it in monetary or physical in numerical terms. So it's like for like or like for better, ideally. If you
So
want to
they
benefit.
come up with the scheme and then it goes back to you to decide whether that's suitable. Is there any way that local people, parish council, can have an input into whether that's acceptable to them as well? Is my question, sorry.
The scheme would be submitted to discharge a provision of the Section 106 obligation and would be publicised as such, yes.
Councillor Prescott, Martin.
I'm sorry to keep labouring this point, but we clearly want mitigation rather than compensation. And I think everybody does. But we've already heard, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've already heard from that the developer is struggling to be able to mitigate in the proximity. So, Chair, I think you're heading in a direction of trying to condition mitigation. But I think as a committee, we are not able to condition in such a way that that condition is simply, it can't be fulfilled, because the next thing that will happen is the developer will come straight back and ask for a variation to remove the condition, and then we're back to square one, but by which time we've already approved the application. I'm conscious that we've got one, well, we've had 2 bites at this already, but I'm conscious that, you know, whatever decision we make here tonight, the die is going to be cast. So even if we condition mitigation locally, the developer comes back in 3 months and said, we've had a look around, we can't see anything, we need to have that condition removed. And that's a perfectly legitimate requirement, because we can't, as I say, we can't create a condition that can't be fulfilled. So I think we can't look at that as a way forward.
So,
with
sorry,
respect.
Martin. Yeah, and I know we mean want to shut down what you're saying, but this is questions, points of clarification.
Well, the question was, why should are we able to produce a condition that we realistically believe is unfulfillable?
And that's the question.
That is my question. There was a question in there. I knew there would be.
We got there in the end. Can we answer that question? I think that is quite central.
We're not suggesting a condition to deal with this matter. The chair was suggesting, as I understand, a change to the recommendation. The recommendation A, at the moment, recommends that the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement that delivers the obligations set out in the agreed heads of terms at table 1, that's all those financial contributions and the affordable housing I was referring to, and a scheme of compensation for the loss of the local wildlife site. As I understand it, that recommendation would change to include reference to mitigation and, as a last resort, compensation for the loss of. It's not a condition, it's a resolution in terms of what the Section 106 planning obligation would require. So it's very different from a condition on the planning permission. Section 106 legal agreement is a deed, a legal document, and it would be part of that. And that was a key point in terms of the advice given by our barrister. Our barrister said that it would not be appropriate to seek to deal with the mitigation or compensation by condition. It would need to be dealt with by a legal agreement.
Thanks. Councillor Bryant, Val.
Thank you. My question, I'll phrase this as a question. The local nature recovery strategy areas for Hertfordshire, surely that is the envelope in which this agreement would be. I think Martin is thinking that in fact someone's going to sit and make it up, but in fact there's actually a forum there which actually looks at these things. Am I right in saying that?
Sorry, in terms of a forum, can you just?
There is an organisation that actually looks at these things.
Yeah, so the local nature recovery strategy, since it's been published, has moved into the delivery phase, which is being guided by the Herts Nature Recovery Partnership. But they wouldn't normally comment on planning applications or decisions. It's not that's not their role necessarily.
It's a shame. Thank you.
I think we're done with questions. So if we could move on to our first public objector as Mr. Ian White.
1, 2, 3. Sorry, Martin Newman, Nick Black, Benny and White.
Okay, so Martin and then yeah, okay. Apologies for that. My running order was not amended. I'm so sorry. So our first public objector is Mr. Martin Newman. Martin, you've got 3 minutes. I'll let you know you've got a minute left.
Good evening. North Hertfordshire does not currently have a 5-year housing land supply. We recognise that this engages the tilted balance in favour of housing. But the NPPF is also clear. Permission should be refused where the harm significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits. In Codicat, that point has been reached. I want to make 2 points. First, cumulative impact and infrastructure pressure. Codicat has already taken substantial growth. Several sites have been completed, are under construction, have permission or are still in the pipeline. The village has grown by more than a quarter, but its infrastructure has not grown with it. There may be no formal cap on growth, but there is a real world limit to what a village can absorb without losing its character. Codicat is already at that limit. The scale and pace of development have changed how the village looks, feels and functions. This site is one of the last small pockets of wild green space within the village untouched by development. Codicat has no rail link and an infrequent bus service. It is, in practice, car dependent. Traffic is already heavy before the full impact of existing and approved development is even felt. The high street and routes to Hitchin, Welling and the A1 are under increasing pressure. Most high street homes have no drives or garages, so pavement park on both sides of the road, narrowing the accessible space for pedestrians, wheelchair users and pushchairs. GP and hospital services are already stretched. Codicat Primary School has only recently expanded to meet rising demand. More development means more pressure. This application is not isolated. It is one more burden on roads, services, school places and village character that are already under strain. The cumulative impact is significant and it must be given serious weight. Secondly, safety and transport. Cowards Lane is not an ordinary access road. It's a narrow country lane, and your site visit will have shown that the development access sits on a notorious blind bend. The lane is part of the well-used National Cycle Route 12. It is narrow, restricted and has poor visibility, and it's simply not suitable for more traffic, especially heavy construction traffic. Traffic modelling may call the increase modest, but it needs to acknowledge the cumulative impact from the Heath Lane development and those avoiding the congestion of the high street. This is just not about numbers on a page. It's about real people using this lane every day. Residents of Cowards Lane and Ponders Meadow, families from Weaver's Gate, young children, pedestrians and cyclists. This issue is not traffic volume alone. It is whether cars, construction vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists can safely share a lane that was never designed for growth on this scale. Where safety is uncertain and the margin for error is this small, the precautionary principle must apply. That uncertainty should weigh firmly against this proposal.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do members have any points of clarification for the speaker? No? Then I will call our second public speaker, which my order is now correct, is Mr. Ian White. No? Nick Black. I guess on the process, by the time I get to the third one, I'm going to have to get it right, aren't I?
Yes.
Mr. Nick Black. Nick, you've got 3 minutes. I'll let you know when you've got a minute.
Thank you. My name is Nick Black. I've lived in Codicat for 24 years. I would like to focus on 2 different areas. Firstly, the lack of meaningful local benefit. While the development will contribute to housing supply at the district level, the direct benefits to the Codicot itself are limited. Contributions secured through the 106 are not clearly targeted at addressing the specific infrastructure deficits within the village. Funds are directed towards wider district projects rather than local mitigation. This creates a clear imbalance. The impacts are experienced locally, but the benefits more widely. In planning terms, it raises a serious question as to whether the development can be generally considered as sustainable in this location. For the proposal to be considered acceptable, there would need to be a clear link between the 106 contributions and alleviating local issues. At a previous application I attended, an officer stated the NHS had identified that there was no requirement for any increased provision. So a village that is suffering 30% growth and no expansion of a doctor's surgeries, this sounds incorrect. Secondly, environmental impacts and biodiversity. It is acknowledged that the site is currently in agricultural use and may not represent high-value ecological habitat in the current state. However, that should not diminish its importance. The site represents open land with clear potential for future biodiverse enhancement. It contributes to the openness of the area and provides an opportunity for nature to recover. Importantly, it performs natural drainage function, attenuating surface water during periods of heavy rainfall. It is regularly waterlogged at these times. Development would result in a permanent and irreversible loss of both that ecological potential and this natural capacity for water dispersal, increasing the risk of flooding to the surrounding area and properties. Once developed, neither the biodiversity potential nor the drainage function can be realistically recreated. In the context of increasing national and local emphasis on biodiversity gains and environmental sustainability, this loss should be given significant weight. The Hertfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy, published in November 2025, identifies this site as an area of particular importance for biodiversity as it sits within a grass and heath focus area. The strategy confirms that these areas form a base for nature to recover and support the Council's response to the ecological emergency. It also notes significant declines in grassland and heath habitats in Hertfordshire over the last 50 years and identifies the need to manage and restore these habitats. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Do members have any points of clarification for the public speaker? Val, you're scrabbling for a button. Councillor Bryant.
Can I just ask for some detail? You may not have this detail about doctor's surgeries. Having looked it up, it looks as if the people of Codicot tend to go to the Welwyn village. Doctor's surgery. Has that had additions to its number of doctors or rooms to actually deal with the other developments?
There'll be no structural changes to the doctor's surgery since I was there last year. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Any further questions? No. In which case, we will move on to our third public speaker. And I'm absolutely certain this should be Mr. Ian White, if that's wrong this time. I'm so sorry, you've sort of been called on several times. So your moment has come, sir. You have 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when it was a minute.
My name is Ian White, a 40-year Codicot resident. Whilst the focus has been on the provision of a footpath north towards St Albans Road, the majority of the vehicle traffic from this proposal will be in the other direction, along a section of Cowards Lane that has no provision for pedestrians, past Weaver's Gate towards the Codicot Road, Welwyn, the motorway and rail networks. As only a small percentage of the houses in Weaver's Gate are currently occupied, the pedestrian traffic along Cowards Lane is only set to increase. We need to be aware that Cowards Lane is the quickest route to the school from Weaver's Gate, where many young families have and are still due to move in. Walking along this narrow road with no pavement becomes a real safety issue. Although these people could use the over-congested high street, the pictures that were sent to you show that pavement parking results in this being an even more difficult and dangerous route. The NPPF is clear that permission should not be granted where the adverse impacts of a development would significantly outweigh the benefits. It is our belief that in this case that threshold has been reached. In these circumstances, the precautionary principle should apply. Where there is uncertainty around safety impacts, that should weigh against this proposal. We consider that Golden Rules 2 and 3 of the NPPF have not been met. Golden Rule 2 relating to infrastructure is not satisfied. The Section 106 agreement does not demonstrate a meaningful boost to public services and infrastructure within Codicut, whilst the cumulative pressures of other nearby developments are already being experienced. Golden Rule 3 is also not met. The application does not adequately protect genuine local green space. The proposed biodiversity offsetting, located many miles away, does not compensate for the loss within Codicut itself. While access may be restricted to footpaths, the wider value of this open land, including its visual and recreational contribution, is significant and irreplaceable. In summary, the harms identified here are not speculative, they are evidenced, cumulative and insufficiently mitigated. When properly weighed against the limited and largely non-localised benefits, the harms significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any points of clarification for the public speaker? No. Then we'll move on to our next speaker. There's only one of these, I can't mess the order up. Is our member advocate objector, Councillor Ralph Muntz. Ralph, you've got 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you have a minute left.
Thank you, Chairman. And colleagues, the question that you are being asked tonight is the question surrounding the tilted balance. The tilted balance is a concept. It is not objective, nor is it clearly defined. Instead, it is subjective, and it is a matter of interpretation. It is in a matter that you tonight are going to have to determine and interpret for yourselves. You've heard from the public speakers, and you will hear from me, that there is indeed a clear legal and policy basis on which to refuse this application. Let us first take the local plan. Over 400 homes are proposed to be situated in Codicut as per the local plan, which was fully examined, and whilst there are a number of issues with it, that was accepted by the local community and by the representatives of the people of North Herts. Not one of those over 400 homes was allocated on this site. This site was allocated to be greenbelt land, and it should remain as such. But there are some who would seek to argue that because of the changes we have seen to the planning system, the local plan is out of date. Now, an appeal decided in relation to an application in Devon in April of last year referenced the principle that whilst development policies may be out of date, due weight should be given to them. Now, that is something I submit is not something which has been considered adequately within the officer report or indeed the submissions of the applicant. Another decision in Worcestershire addressed the point surrounding the 5-year land supply, which I'm sure we're going to hear more about. But that case stated that whilst a district may not be able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply, that is not a license, that is not a carte blanche to build anywhere. And the small number of homes, as is proposed in this circumstance, should temper any weight given to the contributing towards reducing the North Herts housing demand. That decision in Worcestershire also references and speaks to the openness of the village. And I quote, "The site contributes to the rural character and of the surrounding countryside and provides an important setting to the village. I would submit that the circumstances and the location of this site, the same principle could indeed apply." And of course, we've already spoken an awful lot about the cumulative pressure on Codicot. We have seen significant developments take place without adequate infrastructure, in order to support the issues that we see and residents face on a daily basis, whether that be on the high street, whether that be in struggles in trying to get a GP appointment. And of course, we have already heard tonight from Mr. Greaves of the residents in the Riddy who have suffered as a result of pressures on sewage infrastructure as well. There is nothing within the Section 106 agreement for this application which is Codicot specific. And I think local development policies need to be just that. They need to be local. They need to be able to, people who live in Codicot need to be able to see the impact of development in their communities in terms of developer contributions, contributing towards mitigating the issues that we see with development. And then, of course, we have the access arrangements, which many people rely on this road in order to access the school. That is only going to grow with the Weavers Gate development becoming more occupied. And as such, there is no mitigation in there to protect vulnerable road users. Just a final point on this development, which is proposed in a site contained within the local nature recovery strategy.
1 minute.
It is a local wildlife site. And I'm afraid whatever officers or anyone else says, you do not improve biodiversity by building houses. You certainly do not improve local biodiversity by situating a biodiversity site 30 odd miles away. And what has actually changed? Nothing has changed since December when officers were recommending refusal. The applicant has heard the arguments and heard the concerns of the committee, and they have done nothing about it. But I would also point to the opinion of Nina Pinham, who is the barrister. And she says in her final paragraph, there is a high risk of a cost award being applied for, but a low risk of it being successful. Colleagues, there is quite clearly a significant and demonstrable negative impact on Codicot as a result of this development. I would urge you to refuse it. Do not be afraid of an appeal, because ultimately the legal basis which has been given tonight will be strong enough and will withstand the test.
Thank you. Do members have any points of clarification to Councillor Munsell's speech? Councillor Bryant. Val.
Thank you, Ralph. I just want to be a bit picky. I know you as a legal person, you'll enjoy my pickiness. We have a local plan, which is, oh, sorry.
In fairness to Councillor Bryant, it is very disconcerting here. It goes against most people's nature to want to speak to people who are behind me. It feels incredibly rude. So people have a habit of turning around and then you can't hear the microphone. Yes. So to members, speak into the mic and
Ralph,
members of the public don't think you're being rude.
Okay. We have a local plan which is being reviewed, which the review is up to date. I just wonder if you're conflating that with the fact that the Codicot neighbourhood plan, which I know is very recent, seems to have certain of the housing policies missing. I wondered if you could actually explain that to us.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bryant, for that question. I think, of course, there are two development policies in play. Of course, as you have referenced, the Codicot Neighbourhood Plan was indeed recently adopted. And when determining this application, I would also argue that you should give significant weight to that, because that was approved by the majority of the people of Codicot. And as such, it has a democratic mandate and should not be simply ignored. But with respect to the arguments surrounding the local plan, now, there are some who would seek to argue that because the local plan was adopted in November 2022, and we have seen significant changes to the planning system implemented by the government in 2024, that the policies contained within that document are out of date. What I would seek to argue before this committee tonight is that the policies contained within that local plan are not out of date, and they should be afforded significant weight to that. But of course, you do have to take into account the policy framework that is set by national government. However, it is a matter of your interpretation as to how much weight you should grant to the North Herts local plan. And I would argue and humbly submit that the planning policy specifically
not
Codicot.
the question, not making another speech.
Forgive me.
We can all sit and listen to your speeches all day.
If I would just make this final point, Chair, I would say that you need to look very carefully at the local plan policies for Codicot and give those significant weight when interpreting this, determining this application.
Councillor Bryant.
I must look at you. Thank you. I'm not sure that you've taken my point, and that is about the Codicot local plan, because I know in the papers that there's reference to the fact that there are housing policies missing. Is that true? Or relevant?
Sorry, Councillor Munson, did you wish to?
Forgive me, I didn't hear the question. If you wouldn't mind repeating yourself. Thank you.
I'm trying to choose my words very carefully, so I'm clear. I'm not sure that you've answered my question, which was not about our local plan. I think you are actually saying that policies are out of date. It's not the same as a local plan being out of date. Those are two things. But in fact, looking at the Codicot neighbourhood plan and the reference in the papers to the fact that there were housing policies missing from it.
Okay. Did you want to respond to that, Rosh?
I mean, I'm happy to respond to that. Of course, what I would say is that the Codicot neighbourhood plan was thoroughly that work was thoroughly undertaken by a number of individuals from our community, and they set out the policies quite clearly that they thought were most important to the community, particularly surrounding having a structured framework for development, and one which was going to focus on improving local infrastructure because of the strains that we have seen as a result of the sites contained within the local plan.
Thank you. Councillor Prescott. Martin.
I'm sorry if maybe I'm not following this. Is Councillor Bryant, and I'm asking the question of Councillor Munster, but do you think Councillor Bryant is actually suggesting that the Codicot plan is actually defective in some way? You made the point that there were policies missing.
I think this is debate rather than things. So, do any other? I've forgotten to tell you what. Do any members of the committee have any further points of clarification to Councillor Munster before we call in our next speaker? No. Right. Thank you, Councillor Munster. So our next public speaker is a public supporter, Mrs. Rebecca Rose. Rebecca, you've got 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have a minute left. Thank you.
Go green. Red. It's all red. Okay, thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Becky Rose, and for absolute transparency, I should declare that I, along with my husband Stuart, am the owner of the plot of land on the south side of Cowards Lane. We live in Field House overlooking the land with our 2 sons, and we plan to stay there should planning permission for the development be granted. I registered to speak today as I wholeheartedly regretted not registering to speak at the previous planning committee on the 4th of June when this matter was discussed. At that meeting, a number of points were raised by the speakers and advocate, but unfortunately, the answers were not totally accurate. This may have been due to a misunderstanding on the part of the public objectors and Councillor Munster, but I would like to take this opportunity to clarify for members of the committee. I believe that a key reason that councillors felt unable to support the recommendation last meeting was due to their understanding of the pavement situation along Cowards Lane. The objectors and Councillor Munster claimed, and are still claiming today, that children have no choice but to walk to school from Weavers Gate development along Cowards Lane, which has no pavement. Rewatching the last meeting, it is clear that 5 councillors stated this as their key reason for not being able to approve the proposals. I totally understand the difficult position the councillors were placed in. I work in a school myself and believe that the safety and safeguarding of our children is the #1 priority. However, I would like to correct this misunderstanding in case it hasn't become apparent from the councillors' recent site visit. In fact, there is a safe alternative route to school from Weavers Gate that runs more or less parallel with Cowards Lane via the High Street and Recreation Ground. This does not require any walking up Cowards Lane at all.
I've lived in Cowards Lane for 16 years and rarely see children walking along the lane to school. If there hadn't been a safe pavement route for residents to get to the school from Weavers Gate, then I assume it wouldn't have been approved at planning stage. In addition, I'd like to clarify that elderly people from Pointers Meadow retirement homes have no need to, and indeed do not, walk up Cowards Lane, as they have direct safe access via pavements to the village centre, pharmacy, bakery, shops, etc. I believe that at the last meeting, when Councillor Munster was asked directly by a member at the planning committee, am I right in understanding that residents of Weavers Gate have to walk up Cowards Lane to get to school? And he answered, I can confirm that this is indeed the case. This heavily influenced the subsequent debate. I understand and respect that the Planning Council has needed to look further into this potential issue with a site visit. However, I wished at that point in the meeting that I could have stood up and corrected the misinformation, hence registering to speak today. I understand now that council has visited the site during the afternoon school run period, so hopefully they were able to see that no or very few children, elderly persons, or even other pedestrians were walking along the lane. Moving to today's questions. Read the councillor's question earlier on this evening regarding green spaces accessible to the public. Currently, there is just a footpath of approximately 100 metres across our field. The field is not accessible public space. People can't picnic on it or run around it. It's private land. If the development is approved, then the footpath will remain, and an additional public space will be created in the form of a play area. I would also like to clarify that villagers will still have open access to green space in Codicut. They won't have to drive to Bulldog. They just cross the 100 metres across this site to continue their walk in green open space, which is plentiful in Codicut. In fact, green open space is still plentiful around other sites in Codicut. People make it sound as though there's a constant flood of walkers across our field. There is not. Another speaker mentioned that Cowards Lane is busy. It's not overly busy. Hopefully the councillors could see this during their site visit. How many cars did you see? How many people did you see? The school is not at capacity. I think this was mentioned just earlier today. The school has been expanded and has room for many more students in each year. The fact of the matter is that the school is ready for and needs additional pupils to fund the additional teachers required to fill the double entry.
1 minute.
Should planning permission be granted, our family plans to stay in our current home adjacent to the new development. We do love the village. We have lived in Codicut for 30 years, are active members of the community, have volunteered on the playgroup committee, the school PTA, the tennis club committee. I'm currently a trustee of the John Clement Sports and Community Centre. We are reasonable people. I do understand and respect the comments of the 190 objectors, but we must remember that the village has around 3,700 residents. So the vast majority either support or did not feel strongly enough to object. And I've also spoken to villagers who agree with the government's planning policy and agree there is a need for continued need for housing for our young adult children who would love to stay in the village where they grew up. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Do members have any points of clarification for the public speaker? Councillor Prescott, Martin.
Sorry, I didn't catch. Is the lady the owner of the field? I mean, so she's not a public speaker, she's a developer.
It's a public supporter, I registered.
Okay.
Do we have any further points of clarification for the public speaker? No. Mrs. Catherine Bentham. Is it Bentham? Catherine, you've got 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you have a minute left.
Thank you. Chair, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak again this evening. My name is Catherine Bentham. I'm a Senior Director at 25, and we coordinated this application on behalf of the applicant, Horridge Land. Horridge Land is part of the W.E. Black Group of companies, and they are a family-owned SME house builder operating across the southeast of England. Firstly, I trust those of you who visited the site found this beneficial. And rather than repeat my speech from last time, I thought it would be helpful to focus on those areas which were raised as matters of discussion. So taking these in turn, the footway along Cowards Lane. Throughout the course of this application, we have only ever been asked to provide a footpath heading west as you leave the site. This is because for future residents of our site, the quickest way to get to the school and the village centre is to turn left along Cowards Lane.
With regard to the ability of existing residents to navigate the remainder of Cowards Lane to the point where it would meet our new footpath, with the greatest respect, that was a matter which needed to have been dealt with at the time planning permission was granted for those developments. For this application, we have to look at the residents of this site and provide suitable options for them. However, in any case, as you've just heard, there is no need for the children from the Weavers Gate development to walk down Cowards Lane, and they don't walk this way, they walk another way. Can a safe walking route be provided for the future residents of this site? The answer is yes, and that is a conclusion that the County Highways Department have also reached, and they have confirmed no objection to the scheme overall, taking account of all existing traffic and pedestrian traffic. Secondly, there has been discussion with regard to the ability of this site to fulfil the local wildlife site designation, with it being the position at the moment that the site in its current state does not meet the criteria. It is important to remember that, as you've heard, this is private land and only the footpath is public, not the whole field, and the site has been grazed by horses for a number of years. In the event that planning permission were not granted, the grazing would continue, and therefore it would not be the case that the site would then meet the designation criteria. The current situation would be maintained. Doing nothing does not therefore result in the ability of this site to meet the criteria. And I just remind members that the Council's legal opinion also states, and I quote direct, "One obvious solution is to create a suitable compensation scheme for the features of the site identified in the LNRS, which led to its identification as a local wildlife site. This can be secured by the applicant by way of a Section 106 obligation. This does represent a suitable way forward. The site is degraded and is very unlikely to be restored without developer funding and a legal agreement to secure works. Whilst this grassland assemblage may have to be sacrificed, if it means a grassland assemblage within the LNRS elsewhere can be restored and protected, then overall the Council would be able to conclude that there has been compliance with policy SB12, NE4 and paragraphs 159 and 1938 of the NPPF. Moving to flooding, a comment was made in respect to flooding on this site. The site is in flood zone 1, i.e. it is a site in which residential development is acceptable in principle, and there's no objection from the LLFA or the EA. And last time, a comment was made that in respect of areas such as highways and flooding, objections were originally raised and then these matters are resolved. This is completely usual in the planning application, and sometimes it's just a request for additional clarification, as was the case here. That information was supplied, placed on the Council's website, and the objection was withdrawn. And finally, just to confirm, the County Council have also confirmed that there is capacity within the primary school for this development. Your officers have provided a very helpful update report explaining about the tilted balance which applies here. So in summing up, this site is grey belt and therefore is deemed appropriate development. It will make a significant contribution towards the delivery of market and affordable housing. I highlight that in the forthcoming latest NPPF, expected this month, the delivery of housing, including sites of this size, will be given significant weight in the planning balance, and that will be mandated. Proposals to support sites of this size are also expected to be introduced as part of a wider government commitment to supporting SME builders to ensure greater choice and competition in the housing market. And we consider this development of the site has the ability to deliver a substantial ecological benefit compared to the current scenario. We therefore wholeheartedly support your officer recommendation for the grant of planning permission this evening and hope that you will follow that recommendation. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any points of clarification, members of the committee? Councillor Val Bryant. Val.
Could I just come back to the numbers in the school? As you mentioned that you got the county council figures, the figures that I could find today said that the capacity for the school was 270, and at the moment there are 277 children in it. Does that tie with your figures, please?
So we haven't got the figures. It's the county council who confirm whether or not there's capacity in the school. So it's not our research that's confirmed whether or not there's capacity. It's the county council, and they've done a formal response to the planning application, which has confirmed from their perspective that there is capacity.
Yes.
Please come back. That's fine.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine. So basically the capacity of the school has doubled to 60 per year group. So effectively we've got 6 year groups, which is actually a capacity of 360 at the school. It may well be because that's happened relatively recently.
Do we have any further points of clarification for the last speaker? No. Okay, then in which case I would like to invite the officer to respond to any of the issues raised so far. Sean.
Just one matter, and I think that relates to the question that Councillor Bryant asked of Councillor Munster with regards to missing housing policies in the neighbourhood plan. And I think that Councillor Bryant is referring to paragraph 4.8 of the latest report, where I refer in the report to paragraph 14 of the NPPF. Now, this paragraph obviously follows paragraph 11 of the NPPF, which identifies the tilted balance. And this paragraph 14 has been around in various iterations of the NPPF for some time. And it deals with up-to-date neighbourhood plans and what weight you should give to them. And actually, this paragraph provides for provision for tilted balance in favour of the neighbourhood plan if two matters are met by the neighbourhood plan. Those two matters are that there are housing policies in the neighbourhood plan and housing allocation. If there are housing policies and housing allocations in the neighbourhood plan, then the tilted balance is actually rests in favour of the neighbourhood plan, not rather than in favour of proposed housing development. However, Codicut neighbourhood plan has no housing policies or housing allocation, and therefore that tilted balance in favour of the neighbourhood plan isn't engaged in this instance. Codicut isn't alone. I don't know of any of the neighbourhood plans in the district that do actually have housing policies and housing allocations, so that they're not alone in that. None of the neighbourhood plans in the district do. If they did, of course, then they would be given more weight in circumstances such as this, because the balance would be in favour of the neighbourhood plan rather than the tilted balance that applies under paragraph 11. So I think that was perhaps what Councillor Bryant was referring to, and I refer to that in the report because the report seeks to deal comprehensively with applying the tilted balance and whether there's anything that disengages the tilted balance, and NPF paragraph 14 can disengage that tilted balance in favour of neighbourhood plans if there is housing allocations and housing policies, which I'm afraid this neighbourhood plan doesn't have. But then again, neither do any other neighbourhood plans in the district, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Does that conclude your? Yeah. Do members have any further questions of the officer at this stage? No? Okay. So the officer's recommendation is that permission be granted. Unless members are minded to propose a different recommendation on this item, along with material planning reasons, I shall be proposing that we grant permission. Therefore, I propose that we grant planning permissions subject to, and if you need to, I'm adding to the I've got the word in here. We're just seeking do I need to move a motion to amend the recommendation, or can I read it out as part of the thing? Okay. So just to flag up to the committee, it's part A that I'm amending. So, therefore, I propose that we grant planning permission subject to A, the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement that delivers the obligations set out in the agreed heads of terms at table 1, and secure appropriate mitigation measures in respect of impacts on the local wildlife site, and where it is demonstrated that residual harm cannot be adequately mitigated, secure the provision of a compensation scheme as a measure of last resort. B, the applicant agreeing to extend the statutory period to complete the agreement if required. C, providing delegated powers to the development and conservation manager to update conditions and informatives with minor amendments as required, and D, as set out in the report. May I have a seconder? Councillor Fernandez.
Happy to second, Chair. Reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. We move to debate. Does anyone wish to speak? Councillor Winstanley.
Thank you, Chair. I was incredibly torn last time, as I think a lot of people were. And I agree that I was affected on the night by comments that were made. However, upon visiting the site, which I think was incredibly useful, and I will be doing that for future applications, to see it with my own eyes and walk around was incredibly useful. I agree with the supporter speaker tonight that Cowards Lane really doesn't seem like the route you would take. It just doesn't make sense to me, as suggested last time and again tonight, from Weaver's Gate. Also, if this site was lush grassland meadow, as suggested by the LWS designation, it would absolutely carry more weight in my mind, but it isn't that. Despite the existence of buttercups and knapweed, I do acknowledge that. I'm also very reassured by the legal instrument that's been put in place tonight to preferably secure mitigation. So weighing all those things up with what we heard tonight and last time, I will be supporting the application.
Thank you, Dave. Do we have any further? Councillor Prescott, Martin.
I think my concerns are, well, I think we've done the mitigation versus compensation thing quite well. I'm not comfortable with anything that suggests there's going to be mitigation when we've already heard from the developer effectively that mitigation is not going to be possible. But moving aside from that, it's very clear from the aerial views that there's an enormous amount of development already going on in Codicut. And as I understand it, at least one of those developments doesn't have any occupants as yet. So we don't really know the effect of the all of these developments on the local neighbourhood from terms of the infrastructure, doctors, schooling, people travelling. And I have to say, looking at the map, it does look like Cowards Lane is the way people are going to walk from Weaver's Gate, because it's clearly the most direct route. I can't imagine kids walking along the high street, because if I know kids, they're going to go the easiest and quickest route. Also, I'm not entirely sure I would want my kids walking along a high street with cars whizzing up and down it all the time. I think I would prefer for them to go down a nice quiet street, if of course it had some pavement on it. So I'm really uncomfortable with considering this development at a point in time when we actually don't know what the effect is going to be of the two other very much larger developments on the local neighbourhood. Also, again, looking from an aerial view, it's very clear that we allow development on this site. It's effectively going to enclose, there's a tiny little bit of green space above, but it's going to enclose it. So you're going to end up with a wall of development right the way across the area. And again, talking from a wildlife point of view, I'm concerned that the local residents are just going to lose that. And compensating by submitting an opportunity for something that's 20, 30 miles away is not, in my opinion, viable. I mean, I appreciate the compensation is a last resort, but very much a last resort in my mind. I would much rather have wildlife and biodiversity on the doorstep, which is where it is now. And the fact that the field is a scrubby little meadow at the moment, it only takes one season and a bit of rain and no horses grazing there, and it'll be back to a lovely meadow again. So I don't think that's a particularly viable solution either, or a viable alternative either. I'm uncomfortable with this development for a number of different reasons, but I'd like to hear my colleagues and their views. I unfortunately was not able to attend the site visit, so I have to rely upon my colleagues.
sorry, just a very picky point. Can we just clarify? Ralph Muntzer earlier on suggested that the BNG site was 30 miles away. Councillor Prescott has just said 20 or 30 miles away. Can we just clarify how far away Western Hills is from here? It's just a slightly picky point, but just obviously this is on camera. No, I know it's not immediately in the vicinity, but if there's quite a difference between the actual distance to what is being suggested.
And I would just remind people that there's a difference between the BNG thing, which probably is more acceptably further away, and any mitigation to the local wildlife site, which I think, as we've said, we would all like to see much closer. But they are two distinct things. Councillor Val Bryant. Val.
Thank you. This is a tricky one. It was a tricky one last time. They're all tricky. I made my site visit on my own this morning during going to school time, and went down Cowes Lane and on the main road. And one thing that struck me was the amount of pavement parking, not in terms of this application on its own, but generally for Codicut. And I do feel, especially as Councillor Muntzer is here tonight, that in fact Codicut deserves, there should be some lead from one of the councils on helping them to deal with pavement car parking, because it's not something that should be accepted as something that's normal and something which is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez. Emma.
Yes, it's a tricky one again, and it was me who asked the question last time about children using Cowards Lane to go to school. I am reassured from the site visit and the photographs and from the speaker, the lady who owned the field, that it will not be the route of choice, and people are more likely to go up the high street, even though it does have pavement parking, which is not ideal. And I totally agree with Councillor Bryant that something should be done to address this as a problem across the whole of the district, not just Codicot, where it is obviously a major problem. That has swung me more in favour of the application this time. Most definitely there are things that are positive about it. The fact that it will deliver 15 affordable homes that will allow people to stay in the village who might be priced out makes me lean towards supporting it, especially with the security of the amendment to section Part A, where some mitigation will definitely be provided, maybe not on site, but the fact that it might be within the local nature recovery site reassures me.
There are no points of order at Gladingrove. Good try, though. Councillor Peace.
Thank you, Chair. So I said at the last meeting that I thought there were grounds to refuse this application. I still believe that. And having been on the site visit, I still believe that. We've heard this evening that the tilted balance applied when this application was recommended for refusal, and nothing has changed in planning law since then. My nervous finger didn't quite get to the button to suggest that we refuse this. The key in this application is hinging on the recommendation of the KC and whether the applicant's mitigation or contribution in terms of BNG, whether those two things are sufficient to mitigate against the harm to the local wildlife site. Now, in the officer's recommendations, there is a grid saying that the impact on the local wildlife site is moderate. Now, I would contend actually it's significant. And the KC for the council concluded by saying the two parties merely differ on the planning balance, even in the context of 11D, which is tilted balance of the MPPF. If you took that impact as significant, I would contend that that is a serious reason to refuse rather than to grant. And I like the idea of there being further discussion and the applicant coming back with better mitigation that's more local. But we're always told at this committee that we should consider what we have before us. And that's what I intend to do. So please don't applaud, because I'm not saying this for the applause. I'm saying it because I'd like to protect the local wildlife site. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. Councillor Carolyn McDonald.
Thank you. In the previous meeting, I had a couple of concerns. The one was sustainable travel. The other one was the flooding. And the third one was just the cumulative effect of development in Codicut. And Codicut in the local plan had sites allocated, and it has done really well in building those sites. There is a site, according to Google Maps, hasn't started yet. It may have, but it has had its share of development. I don't believe that this site is developable. I don't believe it's the right place for this development. I think there has been a lot already happened. The flood risk, the water that pours through Codicut when it rains is horrendous. And I think the day of the last meeting, I had driven through a day or two before where it was the road was flooding. There's people parked on the pavement in the high street. It's full to capacity. I really just don't think Codicut can take any more. And I do believe that if this application is approved, more will come up in the next 6 months.
Okay, do we have any other members who wish to speak? Okay, well, I'll take my opportunity. It is complex. As Val says, many of the applications we get are complex, but this is a complex one. I agree with a lot of what Councillor Winstanley said, actually, and I would thank Councillor Prescott for suggesting the site visit. I think it certainly for me, it did make a big difference to go and see. I had actually done it. I went twice, actually. I win because I'd gone once on my own, but was scared off by the horses, so I'm afraid. So I went and did it properly with my colleagues, and it was incredibly useful. It was a big issue at the first meeting about the direction of travel for children walking to the school. And I think a number of us formed a view on that. I'm not going to attempt to get consensus in this room on that because I don't think we'll get it. But it was useful to see it. I think it's a point that's been well made. This is private land, and if the application is refused, this doesn't miraculously become a flourishing meadow in the way perhaps we might want it to be. It will remain a horse field, presumably. I don't know. I also think we have to be, with the greatest of respect to our member advocate tonight, we have to be very careful of people who wish to say, I'm not suggesting we can ignore the possibility of an appeal and legal advice. We absolutely can't, as I'm sure everyone knows. We have to take cognizance of the advice that we're given. So on balance, I will stand by the officer's recommendation and ask if we have any other further debate before we move to a vote. Okay. I need to get this right. So the proposal in front of us is that we grant planning permission subject to the points A to D. Point A was amended by myself, and I can repeat that if you wish, but I think we got it down. So the proposal is to accept the application. If we can vote, please.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thanks, Luca. We have further business, but no other applications. So I suggest we have a short break at this point to allow members of the public to leave should they wish to, or stay should they wish to. And then we'll move on to the further business. Is that okay, Sean? Okay, thank you for that elongated and quite exciting break. So we have no more applications to hear. Item 7 is an information note on the National Scheme of Delegation. Sean Greaves to present. Sean.
Thank you, Chair. I've not got a great deal to say about it. I've set it out as to what the National Scheme of Delegation will be in the report, and it's likely to come into effect on the 31st of October. What will have to occur, which hopefully comes out in the report, is that our constitution would have to change to comply with the National Scheme of Delegation. And that many of the smaller applications, for example, householder applications and anything that's any minor applications, that's, for example, housing schemes below 10, would be in Schedule 1 and could not come to this committee, even if a member wished to call it in. Unless members have got any questions about it, then I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Who got in first? Councillor In.
It's not so much a question as a comment. I think I'm absolutely horrified to see this coming out of the government. Micromanagement of the worst kind by central government of local government. I think we ought to at least record our dismay at being faced with this kind of petty, nitpicking little document, which quite frankly is no business of central government at all.
Tom.
Yeah, I'll second that motion. Obviously, under this National Scheme of Delegation, this is the end to call-ins by ward members in the way that we're used to, which I think is a terrible loss. And I was just wondering how it's envisaged that ward members would be able to promote the residents' concerns to the planning team or the committee. I mean, there is a reference to the fact that we'd have a nominated member, presumably the chair of the committee, plus the Sean or his delegate, who would then decide on which applications would be heard by the committee. Would there be some sort of system envisaged whereby ward members could sort of push things in your direction for consideration?
I see no reason why ward members couldn't request via the case officer dealing with application, that a Schedule 2 application, that's major applications, etc., could not be considered to be considered by the Planning Control Committee. And the report sets out those matters. So, for example, a member would have to say, for example, I consider that this involves significant environmental effects or social impacts or whatever, economic effects, and ask that be considered. It would then be for the designated officer and the designated member. There should be more than one, because you have to have obviously a backup or one or two backups for leave and illness and that kind of thing, for the application to be reported to Planning Control Committee. So there will be a process in that, and I think it would be a matter for our constitution to perhaps look at that and set it out in our constitution, which is compliant obviously with the National Scheme of Delegation, but perhaps give a little bit more clarity as to how that will work. There will be workshops relating to the Constitution, and I think the first one will be to deal with with planning and the National Scheme of Delegation. I think it's in July. It's in my diary. On Teams, I believe, in the evening, so you don't have to come into the office. Okay.
Louise.
Yeah, it's just about the government call powers for 150 homes or greater. So So if an officer recommends refusal, will that then just not come to committee at all? Or will that be subject to the discretion?
Is that this item or the next?
Oh, sorry, is that the next item?
next.
Okay, sorry, I'll hang fire.
Yeah, we'll do one at a time.
All right.
Sorry, Liz. Can I just clarify something, John, if I may? Because I read something probably online somewhere. Someone was suggesting that no applications would come to the committee, to planning committees, unless there were 500 or more. But my reading is that the outline permission would come, but the reserved matters wouldn't. Is that correct?
I believe that's the case, but it will be in Schedule 2, and therefore will be a matter for the designated officer and the designated member to consider what should go to committee. I would say that a scheme of 500 houses will certainly have some significant effects in terms of social impacts, environmental impacts, and economic impacts. So I believe those would come to committee in any event.
So I'm thinking more ones under 500.
Yes, those under 500 would be in Schedule 2 and could be reported to committee. And there'll be a kind of a triage process between the officer and the member in terms of assessing which should go. And I suspect as part of that, we would take into account any requests from ward members, etc.
Okay.
But that will probably be fleshed out in the revised constitution.
So it says here at 4.2, Schedule 1 includes all household applications, minor commercial applications, and minor residential applications, as well as all reserved matters other than in respect of a large outline permission defined as 500 or more homes. I just think that may have been misinterpreted elsewhere. So that seems to suggest to me that we would only be looking at reserved matters if it was over 500, but that wouldn't preclude bringing in outline permission for smaller ones.
I think we need to look into the implications of that further, and that will be discussed at the workshops.
Okay. Sorry, Caroline.
Very quickly, presumably there will be a cut-off date where all applications from a certain date will go through this process, where everything before will go through how we're doing it at the moment. And there must be quite a lot that's sitting in the system waiting. So we're not really going anywhere in a hurry, right? It's not going to be from the 1st of October, we're like, right, you let off your duties, you can stay home. There's going to be a fair bit of overlap.
Any application that's still undetermined come the 31st of October, or when we've adopted the Constitution, will be dealt with under the new Constitution. And there will be this triage process. I envisage there will be a reduction in the number of applications coming to Planning Control Committee. We're not proposing to reduce the numbers of meetings for this civic year, and we shall see to what extent the National Scheme of Delegation will reduce the number of applications coming to committee, but there will be a reduction. And it will affect those applications that are currently with us and undetermined at the point where the National Scheme Delegation comes into play. So I think it will be a case of we have a reasonable idea as to what effect it would have. I think we're going to do more work in terms of what applications have been considered over the last year or two for Planning Control Committee, and see what schedule they would fall in, and come to some kind of indication as part of this process as to what we anticipate the effect will be on the amount of business that's coming to Planning Control Committee.
So do we have any indication? I mean, I would hate the committee to get the impression we'll have nothing to do come October. Are you able to give examples of kind of applications we might have heard this year that wouldn't have come here normally, and ones that probably would? So today's presumably would have been.
Today's would have come to Planning Control Committee. It would be a Schedule 2 application. I think we can rightly say that there would be an environmental impacts from that development, and obviously it will be a matter for the designated officer member to determine, because consider whether it should come to committee, and I would have anticipated that it would. Yes,
but to give, so we had one a couple of meetings ago. We had quite a large reserved matters one, but on my reading of this, that wouldn't come.
That is possible that the large reserved matters one wouldn't necessarily come to committee. We're going to have to look at the detail, and we can also consider whether the final it's got to go through Parliament as well. So there may well be some changes as a result of that. I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know whether there would be changes or not.
Rolf back.
But yes, I think it will affect certain types of application that we're used to coming to committee that will no longer come to committee, and we're going to be doing some work on that to try and work out what that is, and that will be part and parcel of this workshop that is going to take place, and thereafter, before we actually change the constitution to comply with the National Scheme of Delegation. If we don't change the constitution to comply with National Scheme of Delegation, all it would do is leave us open for legal challenge of all the decisions made, which would prove rather costly process if we didn't do that, which we'd probably want to avoid.
Yes. Okay. I mean, I hope that the committee appreciate, while I've been chair, and I think all the chairs I've known on this committee, I think would probably lean on the side of allowing stuff to come to the committee if that was appropriate, rather than trying to shut everything down.
Okay.
So I can give that small reassurance from my humble position. So I forget one of the previous ones here. Yes, you would. Okay. Do you want to move on to the second one? Oh, sorry, Ian Mantle. Sorry, Ian.
Just wanted to have a last word. I'm wondering what fact basis this is based on. I cannot help the feeling that somebody has got a bee in their bonnet and they've managed to persuade their colleagues to let it out or to humour it. I really do think what I said before, I think it would be useful if we did express a concern at the pettifogging detail, which really is not helping planning. It's not helping the perception of planning. It's not helping the planning decision-making process. It's just simply there for the sake of the bureaucracy.
One stat to go on this, and I'm not sure where I would get it from. Somebody showed me some figures recently of how many housing applications this authority has approved during its 52-year history, and it's not that many. It's worth looking at those figures. I'm going to try and get them again. I was quite surprised.
And is it reduced as a rather more relevant figure?
Yeah, I think we can work that way. Yeah, perhaps get that figure as well.
Well, I mean, if the applications haven't been submitted, there's a little point in counting how many times we didn't approve something that didn't exist.
Absolutely. Shall we move on to the second item, which is item 8? I think we're on to 8. Yeah, item 8, which is the information note on the government call powers for 150 plus home schemes. Sure.
Thank you, Chair. This is obviously a further information note for members, and it relates to a direction by the Secretary of State relating to housing applications of 150 dwellings or more. And this basically indicates that where the council are minded to resolve to refuse planning permission, that application for a scheme of 150 or more dwellings would have to be referred to the Secretary of State, who would have 21 days in which to consider whether to call the application in. A question was asked earlier from Councillor Peace, I believe. Yes? Was it yourself, Councillor Peace? I'm sure it was.
Yes, it was. I'm just trying to remember what I said. I think it was along the lines of, so if the officer recommended refusal, would it get called in at that stage, or would it come to committee? And if committee refused it, then it would get.
Yeah, it would still come to schemes of 150 dwellings, full or outline, under the National Scheme Delegation, for example, would come to committee, most likely. They would go through that triage system, but I think a scheme of that scale will probably have some environmental, social, or economic impact. And under those circumstances, it would, regardless of the recommendation, it would come to committee. Even if the recommendation was for refusal, it would come to committee, because committee could take a different view, of course. If the members resolved to refuse, we would then refer the application to the Secretary of State. We could not issue the decision notice within 21 days of notifying the Secretary of State. I am aware that there is also a provision in the regulation somewhere that allows the Secretary of State to extend that 21-day period, because it did that with regards to the solar farm at Great Wymley, for example, when that was called in. So, but initially it's 21-day period during which we cannot refuse the planning permission. The Secretary of State could say, well, I'm not interested in this one, and go ahead, or not, as the case may be, and call it in. If he calls it in, inspector is appointed. An inspector will determine what procedure, whether it's hearing, public inquiry, or written representations, would deal with that process, and we'd have an input into that process as the local planning authority.
There we go. So if the Secretary of State does call it in, and it comes to public or an inquiry, in some ways that's kind of fast-tracked the appeals process. What would happen with costs? Because the applicant hasn't appealed our decision. Are costs awarded, or are we liable for costs in the same way that we would be at an appeal?
My view, I've not looked at this in detail, but my on the hoof view, and I'd have to look at it, is that if the inspector considered that our resolution to refuse planning permission was an unreasonable one, there was no, because if we resolved to refuse planning permission, we'd have to have reasons for resolving to refuse. And if the inspector felt that those reasons didn't stand up and were unreasonable, then there would, in my view, probably be a basis for an application for costs.
Yeah. Thank you.
Two questions now, one related to that one. If the Secretary of State calls it in and says, okay, your decision to refuse is correct, would the applicant then still be able to appeal? And B, something completely different, it's not actually the Secretary of State, is it? He or she is not going to be looking at all these individual cases. That was the other question.
Yep, a planning inspector is appointed who stands in the shoes of the Secretary of State. So basically, the planning inspector represents the Secretary of State, and that inspector would make that decision. If the decision would be to refuse planning permission, that would be a decision of the Secretary of State. There would not be a further right of appeal. The only recourse would be if it was felt that the inspector erred in law, they could apply for challenge it through the High Court on judicial review. That would probably what happened under those circumstances.
I do recall coming to a meeting here on the solar farm, and Councillor Bryant, who was chair at the time, had a letter from the Secretary of State saying we could not discuss it. Yes. Very exciting.
So, unless anything else, we've got appeals next. So very briefly, we've had 3 appeals lodged, all through written procedure. We've had no appeal decisions since the last meeting. Unless members have any questions about any of these appeals lodged. Nope. Thank you.
Any questions? No. Only halfway. You need to- That report was for noting. I'll close the meeting. Thank you for your attendance on this pleasant summer's evening. And the next meeting of the PCC is on the 23rd of July 2026, when I'm sure we will still have work to do. I can give my apologies for that one because I won't be there. I'll be at my son's graduation. So Councillor Fernandez will be chairing. Yeah.
So
Oh.
if you're 40 plus and you're single, get away from the time. Come on. How it's going to go.